What would you do if the most dangerous man in the city sat you down and asked you a question you had been hiding the answer to for 7 months, and you understood with the sudden coldness of clear water that the answer was going to change the shape of both your lives? This is not a story about a secret. This is what happens when a woman who has been surviving alone finally meets someone who refuses, quietly and absolutely, to let her survive alone anymore. Persephone Iyer had, by the time she reached her 7th month, developed a very precise vocabulary for the way strangers looked at a pregnant plus-size woman moving through the public geography of Chicago in October, and she deployed the vocabulary internally with the same clinical detachment she brought to the rest of her professional life, which was the life of a senior estate manager for the Verano family residence on the Gold Coast, a role that required her to know, at any given hour of any given day, exactly what was where and who was doing what to which surface of the 22,000 square foot property she managed, and to convey none of that comprehensive awareness to the people whose lives she managed except when it was specifically required. She was 32 years old. She carried 260 pounds on a 5'7" frame that had, over the last 7 months, expanded further in the particular architecture of pregnancy, the heavy fullness of her belly rising in front of her now with a specific gravity that required her to adjust her stride, the additional weight in her hips and thighs pressing against her tailored black trousers, the fullness of her chest that had already required 2 rounds of new professional bras, and she carried all of this with the quiet, controlled competence of a woman who had decided 7 months ago that her professional presentation was going to remain unaffected by the internal reorganization of her body, and had held that decision against considerable external pressure. The Verano residence sat behind wrought iron gates on Astor Street, a 5-story limestone structure of pre-war construction that had been continuously owned by the Verano family for 3 generations and had, over the course of that ownership, been quietly and expensively updated to a standard that satisfied both the aesthetic requirements of the family and the operational requirements of an organization that had considerable interest in ensuring that its principal residence was, among other things, defensively coherent. Persephone had managed the residence for 4 years. She had inherited the position from her predecessor, a Portuguese woman named Inés who had trained her for 6 months before retiring to a coastal town in Alentejo, and she had earned it every day since through the specific discipline of never once permitting a detail to escape her, which was, in her professional judgment, the only foundation on which a person in her role could stand. She knew the location of every security camera on the property. She knew the passcodes for every biometric lock. She knew which of the 17 household staff had children in school, which had elderly parents requiring care, which had marriages that were struggling and might benefit from a discreet schedule adjustment. She knew the specific brand of tea the household's principal preferred at 3 in the afternoon and the specific brand he preferred at 9 at night. She knew, because she was a woman who noticed everything and stored it in the specific organized architecture of her mind, the name of every single flower that had been planted in the residence's private garden and the month each had been planted, and the specific fertilizer schedule that kept them functioning through Chicago winters. She did not, in her official capacity, know very much about the residence's principal beyond what her role required her to know. He was Silas Verano, 42 years old, 3rd-generation head of the Verano organization, which the polite public commentary of the city described as a family investment group with substantial holdings in commercial real estate, private port infrastructure, and legitimate transportation logistics, in which the less polite commentary of the city, when the less polite commentary of the city was permitted to speak candidly, described as one of the 4 organizations that had controlled the criminal operational architecture of Chicago for the better part of the 20th century, and which had, under his personal leadership, achieved a level of institutional discipline in the 21st century that had made it considerably more resilient than its peers. He was, by every professional assessment Persephone was equipped to make from the specific proximity of her role, an extraordinarily careful and extraordinarily private man, and she had, over 4 years of managing his household, seen the specific personal registers of him that no one else outside his direct organization was permitted to see. The specific way he sat at the kitchen island at 6 in the morning with his espresso and his phone before the rest of the residents woke, the specific quiet way he thanked the housekeeper who brought his laundry back from the cleaners on Thursday afternoons, the specific and startling gentleness with which he handled the black Belgian shepherd named Nero that had been his companion for 6 years, and she had, over those same 4 years, developed a professional understanding of him that was, if she was honest with herself in the small private compartment of her mind she reserved for honesty, considerably more comprehensive and considerably more sympathetic than her professional position required. The pregnancy had happened 7 months and 1 week ago, in a specific set of circumstances that she was still, at 7 months, in the process of parsing. There had been a March evening. There had been a formal Verano organizational dinner at the residence, a gathering of senior lieutenants and out-of-town family that had involved the deployment of the household's full staff and every operational reserve Persephone possessed, and had concluded, at 3 in the morning, with a complicated logistical situation involving a fire in one of the residence's service corridors, small, contained, but real, that Persephone had personally managed through a coordinated response with the residence's on-site fire suppression system and 2 members of the security staff, and which had resulted in 3 hours of adrenaline-controlled emergency management on her part, ending with the situation neutralized, no property lost. And Persephone standing in the smoke-scented service corridor at 6 in the morning with soot on her white blouse and her hair coming out of its professional pin and the specific hollowed exhaustion of a person who had, over the previous 9 hours, exceeded every physiological reserve she had understood herself to possess. Silas Verano had come down to inspect the corridor at 6:15. He had, upon seeing her in the specific state she had been in, done something he had never done in her 4 years of employment at his residence, which was to take her by the elbow and walk her firmly to the residence's private library, and to seat her in one of the leather chairs, and to pour her a glass of brandy from the decanter on the sideboard, and to sit across from her, and to say, quietly, with a directness that she had not encountered from him in any prior interaction, that she had performed the previous 9 hours with a quality of professional judgment that he had rarely encountered in his life, and that he understood, in a way he considered it important to acknowledge, that her contribution to the security of his household considerably exceeded the parameters of the position she had been hired to occupy, and that he wanted her to know he was specifically aware of it. He had said this, and then, after saying it, he had sat with her in the library for the next 20 minutes without further conversation, in a silence that had, in her subsequent recollection, been the specific and terrible silence of 2 people who had just discovered that there was considerable additional territory between them that had not been mapped, and who were making the immediate and involuntary decision about whether they were going to permit the mapping to happen. They had, that night, permitted the mapping. Persephone was not, at 7 months later, going to lie to herself about the specific circumstances of what had happened between the 2 of them in the library at 6:30 on the morning of the fire, because lying to herself was not a habit she was going to permit at this stage of her life, when she was, whatever else she was, a woman carrying a child. What had happened had been mutual, considered, and in retrospect, the kind of decision made by 2 people who had been carefully not making that decision for a considerable prior period, and who had, in the specific vulnerability of a shared crisis, permitted a wall to come down that had, until that morning, been maintained with mutual, unspoken discipline. It had happened once. It had happened only once. And by 9 in the morning, when the residence had returned to its ordinary rhythm and the fire inspector had left the property and Persephone had gone home to her apartment on Cedar Street to shower and change, she and Silas Verano had, through a series of very brief and very controlled interactions across the next 48 hours, arrived, without speaking directly of it, at a mutual and unspoken agreement that the March morning had been a specific event of specific circumstances and that the professional structure of their relationship was going to continue as it had, and that neither of them was going to disturb the arrangement by referring to it directly. 2 months later, she had discovered that she was pregnant. She had, in the specific privacy of her Cedar Street apartment on a Saturday morning, sat at her kitchen table with the 3 home tests arranged in front of her and the light coming through the east window, at the specific angle Chicago light comes through east windows in May, and she had performed the internal calculation with the same clinical attention she brought to the residence's operational budgets, and she had arrived at 3 conclusions that had, in the 20 weeks since, formed the operational foundation of every subsequent decision she had made about her life. She was going to carry the child. She was not going to inform Silas Verano. And she was going to continue to perform her professional role at his residence at the standard he had come to expect until such time as she could no longer physically do so, at which point she would resign with a professionally structured explanation that would not require her to disclose the specific truth to him or to anyone else in his organization. She had held to these three conclusions with the specific discipline that had characterized every other decision she had made in her adult life, and she had, over the 20 weeks that followed, managed the residence with unbroken competence, dressed for work every morning in the specific tailored professional clothing that permitted the pregnancy to remain visually understated rather than declarative, and, through the coordinated efforts of her tailor and her particular preference for structured jackets, had succeeded at the professional theater of a pregnancy that was accommodated by her wardrobe rather than dictating it. She had informed no one at the residence of the pregnancy until it had become physically impossible to conceal, at approximately month 5, at which point she had provided a brief factual notice to the senior members of the household staff and had allowed the residence's operational rhythm to accommodate the fact without permitting the fact to become a subject of ongoing conversation. Silas Verano had, at the point of her disclosure to the staff, said nothing to her directly about it. He had, over the 2 months since, continued to interact with her in his ordinary registers of professional courtesy and had, from a proximity that Persephone had trained herself not to catalog with any specificity, watched her. He had, in fact, been watching her for the better part of 2 months with a quality of attention that Persephone had, in her private moments of clarity, cataloged precisely enough to understand what it meant, and had, in her ordinary daily discipline, refused to catalog. She was aware, at all times during her working hours, of his location in the residence. She was aware that his location was frequently closer to her working location than the operational logic of the residence would have required. She was aware that he had, on approximately 11 occasions in the last 8 weeks, arranged his day such that he was in the residence's kitchen at the specific 10-minute window in which she took her mid-morning tea. She was aware that he had, on 3 occasions, arranged for the residence's driver to deliver her home in the evenings, on the specific documented pretext of weather that had not, in retrospect, been sufficiently severe to require the accommodation. She was aware, above all, that he had, at some point in the last 6 weeks, made the internal decision that he was going to have a specific conversation with her, and that he had been waiting, with the specific patience of a man who was capable of considerable patience when the situation required it, for the specific moment at which the conversation would happen. The moment arrived on the second Wednesday of October, at the end of a working day in which Persephone had spent 9 hours managing a complicated set of preparations for a weekend gathering the residence was hosting, and had, by 6 in the evening, arrived at the specific state of physical fatigue that pregnancy at 7 months routinely produced in her, a fatigue she had learned to manage by pacing her afternoon carefully and by permitting herself a 15-minute break at 4 to sit in the small staff office and drink a glass of water and recenter. She was, at 6:02, in the process of concluding her operational review of the day with Marcus, the residence's head of security, when Silas Verano came through the door of the staff office. Marcus, who was a man of considerable operational discipline himself, registered the entry, completed his summary sentence in 12 seconds, folded his notebook, and excused himself with a professional nod, and the door closed behind him. And Persephone was alone in the small staff office with Silas Verano, and the specific quality of quiet that indicated that the conversation she had been aware was coming had finally arrived. He looked, at close range in the office's warm overhead light, exactly as he had always looked in the 4 years she had worked in his residence, tall, well over 6 feet, densely built through the shoulders and the chest in a way that his bespoke charcoal suit accommodated with precision. Dark hair swept back from a face of carved severity that carried a fine white scar along the left side of his jaw from something he had never explained and that Persephone had learned, from a discreet conversation with Marcus once, had been acquired at 19 in a specific and significant event that had shaped his subsequent professional life. His eyes were a dark, almost black amber that at close range possessed a quality of complete, non-performative attention that had always been, in Persephone's private assessment, the most distinctive physical feature of him. He looked at her now, in the staff office, with that quality of attention completely deployed, and he said, quietly, "Persephone, sit down. We are going to have a conversation." She sat, because he had asked her to, and because standing at 7 months was requiring more from her than it had at 6, and because the conversation was, by every internal signal she was receiving, one that was not going to be brief. He sat across from her, not at the small desk, but in the second chair at the small round table she used for staff briefings, and he angled the chair so that he was facing her directly, close enough that his knee did not quite touch hers, but was aware of hers, and he was quiet for a long moment. In the specific quiet she had learned to recognize as the quiet of a man who had prepared his opening sentence and was now weighing whether he was going to deliver it in the form he had prepared it or in a slightly different form that had suggested itself in the proximity of the actual moment. "I want to be direct with you," he said, and settled on the direct form. "I have known you were pregnant since June. I have known you were pregnant with my child since June. And I have been waiting for you to tell me, because I understood that it was your decision to disclose in your own timing, and because I did not want to intrude on that timing. I have now waited 4 months. I am not going to wait longer. Tell me who the father is, Persephone, once, and do it in the honest terms. I will not accept a professional evasion. I have earned, at this point, the honest terms." The office was very quiet. Persephone Iyer sat in her professional black trousers and her tailored white blouse and her structured navy blazer, with her hands resting on the small round table in the specific, composed arrangement that 4 years of professional discipline had made her default, with the weight of her 7-month belly pressing gently against the edge of the table. And she looked at Silas Verano in the warm overhead light of the staff office, and she understood, with the specific clarity of a woman who had spent for months constructing a wall against a moment she had known would eventually arrive, that the wall was going to come down now, and that she was going to have to be the one who took it down, and that the taking down was going to require a courage she had been telling herself she did not need to summon. She took a breath, small and controlled. She let the internal architecture of her 4-month position dissolve. She said, "It is your child, Silas. I have known since May. I made the decision in May that I was going to carry the child and that I was not going to tell you. And I have been holding to that decision, and I understand now that the decision was not fully mine to make, because the honest answer to your question has always been an answer that concerned you as much as it concerned me, and I owe you the honest answer, and I am giving it to you now." The silence that followed was the specific silence of a man absorbing something he had, in every practical sense, already known, because the request had not been the request of a man seeking new information, but the request of a man requiring a specific confirmation from the specific source, and who was, in the moment of formal confirmation, permitting himself a response he had not permitted himself to formulate in the absence of the confirmation. Silas Verano did not move for a long moment. His hands, on the table across from hers, remained still. His face did not change in any register she could have named from 4 years of professional observation of his registers. But something in his amber eyes, something specific and internal and complete, moved through and settled, and the version of him that emerged from the small internal reorganization was a version she had, in 4 years, not seen. He looked at her. He did not speak for another beat. Then, in a voice that was quieter than his ordinary quiet, and that carried the specific weight of a decision that had already been made and was, in the moment of its articulation, becoming operationally binding, he said, "Thank you. I know what it cost you to say that. I am going to say what I am going to say next once, and I am going to say it in the honest terms because you have given me the honest terms, and I will not insult what you have just done by saying it any other way. I have wanted, since March, to be permitted a conversation with you that I understood I was not entitled to initiate, because the professional structure of our relationship precluded it, and because I did not want to place you in the specific difficult position of being asked to consider the possibility of a personal relationship with your employer. I have held that position for 7 months. I am not going to hold it any longer. The child you are carrying is my child, and you are the mother of my child, and I am asking you, in this room and at this moment, to permit me to be part of what happens next, in whatever configuration you find you can tolerate. I am not asking for an immediate answer. I am asking for the opening of a conversation that I understand may take considerable time. What I need to know, tonight, is whether the door is closed or whether the door is open. If it is closed, I will accept that, and I will structure my remaining involvement around your absolute autonomy. And I will ensure that the child and you are supported for the rest of both of your lives at whatever material standard you require, and I will not intrude further. If it is open, we will have a longer conversation. Which is it, Persephone? Persephone Iyer looked at Silas Verano across the small round table in the warm overhead light of the residence's staff office at 6:09 on the second Wednesday of October. At 7 months and 1 week into a pregnancy, she had been carrying alone by choice for 20 weeks, and she performed the internal calculation with the specific clinical attention she brought to every important calculation of her life. And she arrived at the answer that had, in fact, been sitting quietly at the base of her chest for 4 months, waiting for her to have the courage to acknowledge it. "The door is open," she said. "It has been open. I have been keeping it closed on my side because I have not known whether it was open on yours, and I have not been able to survive learning that it was not. I am telling you now that on my side it has been open the whole time. I am asking you, in this room and at this moment, to tell me plainly whether on your side it is open too. I need the plain answer. I cannot do this on inference. I have been doing this on inference for 7 months, and I have reached the limit of my capacity for inference." Silas Verano looked at her. He did not speak immediately. What he did instead was, with a specific, unhurried care that she watched happen, that she registered as care, that she understood in the moment to be a physical response he was permitting himself because he had, in the last 30 seconds, been given the permission that he had, in his own way, been waiting 7 months to be given. He reached across the small round table and took her hand in his, and his hand at close range was warm and considerably larger than hers and slightly rough at the knuckles, in the specific way of a hand that had done work of a kind not ordinarily done by men in his position. And he held her hand with the particular firm, gentle certainty of a man who had made an internal decision and was now, in the physical act of taking her hand, formalizing it externally. "On my side it is open," he said. "It has been open since March. It has been open more completely, over the last 7 months, than any door I have ever kept open in my adult life. I am telling you plainly, and once, so you never have to work from inference again. I love you, Persephone Iyer. I have loved you for a period of time considerably longer than the 7 months since we were together, though I have not permitted myself, until the last hour, to describe it that way even in my own private accounting. I love you specifically. I love your mind and your discipline and the specific way you have managed my residence for 4 years and the specific way you carry yourself through rooms that have not always been kind to you, and the specific way you have carried our child for 7 months without asking me for a single thing, which I understand as both a gift and a specific injustice I would like the rest of my life to correct. I am telling you this because you asked for the plain answer and because you deserve to have it in language that admits no ambiguity. That is the answer. I am now going to ask you a specific practical question, and I want you to answer it in whatever terms feel most honest to you. Will you come home with me tonight? Not to negotiate the shape of what happens next, just to be in the same building with me, tonight, so that I know for the first time in 4 months that you are in a residence that has been prepared for you rather than in an apartment that has been managing the pregnancy alone. That is the only question I am asking tonight. Everything else can wait for tomorrow." Persephone sat with her hand in his, in the specific warmth of the office's overhead light, and the specific quiet of the room, and the specific weight of what he had just said, and she looked at him with the eyes of a woman who had spent 4 months surviving alone by choice and who was, in the specific moment of being offered an alternative, discovering that the surviving had cost her considerably more than she had permitted herself to acknowledge. Her free hand came up, without her deciding to move it, and rested against the round curve of her belly, and she looked at Silas Verano across the small round table, and she said, "Yes, I will come home with you tonight. I will do so on the condition that we are honest with each other about the fact that neither of us has, in 4 months, adequately said what needed to be said, and that we are going to have to say considerable additional things over the coming weeks in order to construct a foundation that is going to hold. I am willing to do that work. I am willing to do it tonight. But I am telling you plainly, as you have told me plainly, that I am not the kind of woman who accepts the outline of something without first understanding the interior of it. If you want me in your residence, and you want me at the center of the life of the child I am carrying, and you want me at the center of your life in the particular formal sense that I am inferring from what you have just said, you are going to have to do the specific work of being known by me. And you are going to have to permit me to do the specific work of being known by you. And neither of us has done that work adequately in 4 years of professional proximity or in 7 months of the intimate consequences of one March morning. I am willing to begin the work tonight, but I want you to understand what I am agreeing to. He looked at her. What moved across his face at that specific statement of her terms was, unmistakably, the deepest and most complete version of a smile she had ever seen on his face in 4 years of watching him. And it was not a public smile, and it was not a professional smile, and it was not any of the small courtesy expressions that his ordinary registers accommodated. It was the smile of a man who had just been given, by a woman whose intelligence he had respected for 4 years, the specific gift of being taken seriously in return, and who was recognizing, in real time, that the gift was going to require of him a quality of participation that he had not, in his adult life, been asked to provide. I understand what you are agreeing to, he said. I agree to it in return. I want the interior. I have wanted the interior since long before I was in a position to acknowledge wanting it. I will do the specific work. I will require you to do the specific work back. That is the beginning of the conversation. Let me take you home now. The rest of the conversation will happen over the weeks and the months, and, if we are honest and careful with each other in the way you have just described, the years that follow. But the first requirement is that we stop having the conversation in a staff office. Come home, Miyakura. The endearment was quiet and specific and had, in the moment he permitted it, the quality of a word he had been saving for the specific occasion of being permitted to use it aloud, and Persephone registered it, and did not respond to it verbally, and squeezed his hand once, and stood up carefully with the two-handed leverage the 7th month required, and permitted him to help her into her coat, and permitted him to walk her out of the staff office and through the residence to the private drive at the side entrance, where the residence's driver was already waiting with the armored car warming for the 11-minute drive to Silas's private residence on the lakefront. And she got into the car, and he got into the car, and the door closed. And Persephone Iyer, who had, 7 months ago, made a decision on her kitchen table on Cedar Street to carry a specific child through a specific pregnancy alone, discovered that the alone had ended 22 minutes earlier, in a small staff office, over a small round table. In the specific moment, she had permitted herself to say the plain sentence that had been sitting at the base of her chest since May. The car pulled away from the residence, and Silas took her hand again in the specific warmth of the back seat, and they were quiet with each other for a mile before she turned her head to look at him and said, "There is one more thing I need to say tonight, and I need to say it before we get to the residence, because I need to say it in a moving car where the physical fact of the movement is going to make it possible for me to say it. Whatever we agree, whatever configuration we arrive at, whatever shape our life takes, I want you to know that I am not carrying this child because I made a mistake in March. I am carrying this child because in March I made a decision I understood at the time to be a decision, and because in May I discovered that the decision had a consequence, and because at the moment of discovery I made the second decision, freely, and with the full specific attention I bring to the decisions that matter, that I was going to carry this child regardless of what happened with you. I want you to know that so that you never have to wonder about it, and so that our child, when our child is old enough to ask, is able to be told without ambiguity that she was chosen by both parents at every stage of her existence. I am telling you this because the honest terms require it." Silas Verano was quiet for a long moment. In the passing light of the street lamps along Lakeshore Drive, his face was intermittently illuminated and intermittently dark, and Persephone watched the specific alternation of light and dark across his features with the attentive stillness of a woman who had, in the last 22 minutes, been given permission to look at him with the frankness she had trained herself for 4 years not to permit. He said, in a voice that was quieter than his ordinary quiet, "I am going to say something back that requires the same terms. I did not know, in March, that I was going to become the father of a child. I did not, in the specific moment, contemplate that possibility with the seriousness it deserved. I have thought about that fact considerably in the intervening 7 months. I want you to know that the version of me you are agreeing to permit into your life, and into the life of our child, is a version who has, over those 7 months, understood the specific weight of what happened, and who has arrived, At the end of the 7 months, at a settled decision that this child is the specific most important thing that has ever happened to him, and that you are the specific most important person who has ever happened to him, and that any further version of my life that does not accommodate these two facts as its foundational structure is not a version of my life I am willing to live. I want you to know that in the honest terms, so that you never have to wonder. Our child was chosen by me at the moment I learned of the possibility of her existence, which was in June, when I understood without needing to be told that you had begun to carry her. That was the moment. I have carried the specific fact of her since then, in a way that has reorganized every subsequent day of my life. I am telling you so that you can tell her, when the time comes, that both of her parents chose her at the moment they were each given the specific opportunity to choose. Persephone looked at him. In the passing light of the street lamps, her eyes filled with a specific quality of water she had not permitted herself in 7 months, and she did not attempt to prevent it, and she did not attempt to explain it, and she said, quietly, "Thank you. I did not know that. I could not have known that. I am glad I know it now." She paused. She looked out the window at Lakeshore Drive at 7:14 in the evening, at the specific quality of Chicago October light on the water. She said, "It is a girl. I found out 3 weeks ago. I have been waiting to have someone to tell." Silas Verano squeezed her hand once, tightly, and said nothing, and the car continued along Lakeshore Drive toward his private residence. And by the time they arrived, the specific reorganization of two lives that had begun in a staff office at 6:02 had continued, in the quiet, honest terms both of them had insisted on, into a shape that neither of them, at 6 that morning, had permitted themselves to imagine as available. The lakefront residence was a modernist structure of glass and pale stone that Silas had built 4 years ago on a parcel of land his grandfather had purchased in 1962, and it sat behind a discreet security perimeter that Persephone had never previously seen from the interior side of. He walked her through the front doors and into a foyer of warm oak floors and specific evening light, and Persephone paused inside the doorway and stood for a moment absorbing the specific fact of the interior. The scent of it, cedar, and the particular quality of clean air that expensive residences produced, the warmth of it, the specific arrangement of a single large arrangement of white roses on a low console table that had, she understood immediately, been placed that afternoon because he had been preparing for the possibility of her arrival, and Silas, who had watched her absorb the interior with the attentive stillness of a man giving her the specific time she required, said, "The residence has 3 guest suites on the 2nd floor that are ready for you. You may use any of them. You may use all of them. You may use none of them. The single condition of your presence in this residence tonight is that you are in it. Everything else is your choice." Persephone looked at him and said, "The one closest to yours," and Silas said, "That is the one I have been keeping ready. Come." He led her up the wide oak stairs to a suite that had been, in fact, prepared with a specific attention to detail that told her without needing to be told that he had, over the last 4 months, been arranging the specific possibility of this evening in small, careful ways she had not been in a position to see. The bed had been made with linens whose specific weight and specific texture were designed for the particular sensitivity of a pregnant body. The bathroom had been stocked with the specific products she had noted in her professional inventory of the residence's supplies as her personal preferences. A small carafe of water and a plate of sliced fruit sat on the bedside table. On the low bench at the foot of the bed, folded with the care of a housekeeper who had been given a specific instruction and had executed it with pride, was a set of new pajamas in a soft dove gray silk, in her exact size, that had been purchased specifically for her. Persephone stood in the doorway of the suite and looked at the specific completeness of the preparation and understood, in the specific moment of understanding it, that Silas Verano had been quietly and carefully preparing for the specific possibility of her arrival for a considerable period of time, and that the preparation had been carried out with the specific respect for her autonomy that had refused to assume the arrival would happen and had, nonetheless, ensured that if it did, she would arrive at a residence that had been readied for her at every specific level of detail. "Silas," she said, quietly, from the doorway. "Yes," he said, from behind her in the hallway. "When did you have all of this prepared?" "In stages," he said. "The linens were ordered in July, in your specific size for pregnancy comfort. after Marcus mentioned that the residence's linens might not be appropriate. The bathroom products were selected in August from your professional inventory of preferences. The pajamas were made in September by the atelier that has produced my shirts for 12 years. After I gave them your specific measurements as I had estimated them from my private observation, which I understand is a specific admission I am now making aloud for the first time. The white roses were placed at 4 this afternoon by the housekeeper, whom I informed at 3 that there was a possibility a guest would be joining us for the evening. Each of these preparations was made in the specific understanding that they might not be used. Each was made anyway. If you would like to sleep in this suite tonight, I am glad. If you would like to sleep in another suite, I will move the preparations there. If you would like to sleep in my suite, I will make the specific arrangements. Everything is your choice. Persephone Iyer looked at the specific care of the preparation, at the specific pajamas, and the specific water, and the specific arrangement of white roses she had noticed in the foyer and now understood had been arranged with her arrival in mind. And she turned back to Silas Verano in the hallway, and she said, in a voice that was quiet and even and honest in the way she had promised him she would be honest, I am going to sleep in this suite tonight. Tomorrow we will discuss the longer arrangement. Tonight I want to change into the pajamas that you have specifically had made for me, and to sit downstairs with you for an hour, and to eat whatever the housekeeper has prepared for us, and to permit myself, for the first time in 7 months, the specific experience of being in a residence that has been prepared for me rather than a residence I am managing on someone else's behalf. I want to permit myself the specific rest of that experience. I want to permit myself the specific rest of being taken care of. I have not permitted myself that experience in a very long time, if I am honest, and I understand tonight that I have been considerably more tired than I have permitted myself to acknowledge. I am going to acknowledge it now. Silas Verano looked at her from the hallway, and the specific look on his face was the look of a man who had, in the last 3 hours, received a series of gifts he had not expected to receive and was, in the specific accumulation of them, having a private response that he was permitting her to see for the first time, and he said, I will meet you downstairs in the library in 20 minutes. Take as long as you need. There is no schedule tonight. The rest of your life begins whenever you are ready for it to begin. I will be waiting in the library. Persephone changed into the dove-gray silk pajamas that had been made specifically for her by an atelier she had not previously known existed, and the specific pajamas fit her body at 7 months with the specific accuracy of a garment that had been designed for exactly the body she currently occupied, and she stood in front of the bathroom mirror for a long moment and looked at the reflection of a woman who had, 7 months ago in her kitchen on Cedar Street, made a specific decision to carry a specific child through a specific pregnancy alone, and who was, at 7 months and 1 week later, standing in a bathroom of a lakefront residence in pajamas that had been made for her, and about to go down to a library where the father of her child was waiting to eat dinner with her. And she permitted herself a specific small smile at the reflection that was neither professional nor performative, but simply the specific personal response of a woman recognizing that the shape of her life had, in the last 3 hours, undergone the specific reorganization she had permitted herself to hope for in the smallest and most private compartment of her mind and had not, in 7 months, permitted herself to expect. She went downstairs to the library. Silas was waiting, with 2 plates of the specific pasta the residence's housekeeper had prepared that evening. A simple orecchiette with the specific sausage and broccoli rabe he had told her, once, for months into her employment, was the dish his grandmother had made, set on a low table by the fire, and a glass of cold sparkling water for her, and a small glass of red wine for himself. And the specific quality of light in the library was the warm gold of firelight and a single low lamp on the sideboard, and Persephone Iyer sat down across from Silas Verano in a low armchair with the specific full weight of her 7-month body settling into the specific give of the cushion, and she picked up the fork, and she ate. And they talked. For the next 3 hours, over the pasta and after the pasta, they talked. She told him the specific things about her that 4 years of professional proximity had not permitted her to tell him. He told her the specific things about him that 4 years of professional proximity had not permitted him to tell her. She told him about her mother, who had died when she was 23, and about her father, who lived in Portland and whom she called every Sunday. He told her about his father, who had died when he was 28 and who had, in the last conversation between them, made Silas promise that Silas would build a life that included, when the moment presented itself, a family, and about his specific failure over the 15 years since to build that life, until 7 months ago in a residence library at 6:30 in the morning after a fire in a service corridor, when the specific possibility of it had presented itself for the first time in his adult life. She told him what she wanted for her daughter's name, and he told her what he wanted for her daughter's name, and they discovered, with the specific quiet pleasure of two people finding an unexpected agreement, that they had, without knowing it, been considering the same name for months. They talked, and the fire warmed the library, and outside the tall windows the lake was dark under an October sky. And by 10 in the evening Persephone was so profoundly tired in the specific accumulated way of a woman who had, for 7 months, been carrying more than she had permitted herself to notice, and Silas walked her back upstairs to the suite that had been prepared for her, and he stood in the doorway for a moment, and he said, "Sleep. I will be in the suite 2 doors down. If you need anything, at any hour, come and find me. There is no configuration in which you should be alone tonight. I want you to know that." And Persephone said, "Thank you. I will sleep. Tomorrow we will keep talking." And Silas nodded once, and stepped back, and pulled the door closed, and Persephone Iyer, at 10:07 in the evening on the second Wednesday of October, at 7 months and 1 week pregnant with the daughter of Silas Verano, climbed into a bed that had been prepared for her at every specific level of detail by a man who had loved her for a period of time considerably longer than she had permitted herself to know. And she slept for the first time in 7 months, without the specific weight of being alone in her body, and she slept deeply and without dreams. And when she woke at 7 in the morning to the specific warm October light through the specific east window of a residence that had been prepared for her, she woke to the specific first morning of a life she had not, 7 months earlier, permitted herself to believe was available to her, and she understood, in the specific quiet of the waking moment, that the life had, in fact, been available to her all along, and that all it had required, in the end, was for Silas Verano to ask her one honest question and for her to answer him with one honest sentence, and for both of them to sit with the specific consequences of the honesty and to permit those consequences to reorganize the rest of what came next. The reorganization continued over the following weeks and the following months, in the specific quiet and specific careful terms both of them had insisted on that first evening. Persephone moved into the lakefront residence formally in the 3rd week of October, at Silas's specific request, and with her specific agreement that the arrangement was, at that stage, a shared residence rather than a shared bedroom, and that the further stages would occur in whatever timing felt right to both of them. She continued to manage the Astor Street residence at a modified schedule that accommodated the last 2 months of her pregnancy, with Silas's specific insistence that she reduce her operational load and Marcus's specific competence in absorbing the reduced portion. She met, in the last week of October, with a specific obstetrician Silas had discreetly identified and vetted, a woman named Dr. Ashwini Rao who had trained at the Mayo Clinic and who provided a quality of care that Persephone had not previously believed was available at any price. She met, in the 2nd week of November, with Silas's older sister Beatrice, a woman of considerable warmth and considerable directness who had flown in from her own life in New York to meet Persephone specifically, and who took Persephone's face in her hands at their first meeting and said, in a voice that was quiet and immediate and utterly serious, "Welcome to the family. We have been waiting for you." And Persephone had, in the specific moment of receiving that welcome from a woman she had never previously met, understood something specific about the shape of what she was joining that she had not previously understood. Their daughter was born in the 3rd week of December, on a night of heavy Chicago snow, in a private suite at Northwestern Memorial that Silas had arranged and Dr. Rao had approved, and Silas Verano, who had, in the 4 months since the 2nd Wednesday of October, become the specific version of himself Persephone had glimpsed at the edges of his personality for 4 years, and had never before seen expressed openly, was present for every hour of the 22-hour labor, and held her hand for every specific contraction, and did not leave the room once. And, when the child arrived at 3:14 in the morning of the 21st of December, took the specific small warm weight of his daughter from Dr. Rao with a quality of quiet reverence that made Dr. Rao a woman of considerable professional experience in these moments. Look at Persephone across the birthing suite with a specific expression that was the private nurse's expression of a woman recognizing that the family in front of her was, in the specific moment of its formation, functioning at a level of shared attention that she had rarely witnessed in her career. They named their daughter Anais Aurelia Verano. Silas held her for the specific first hour of her life, and Persephone rested against the specific arranged pillows of the birthing bed and watched him hold her and understood, in the specific quiet of the small hours of a Chicago December morning, that the specific decision she had made in her kitchen on Cedar Street in May, to carry a specific child through a specific pregnancy alone, had, in the end, been the specific decision that had brought her here, to a birthing suite at 3:14. In the morning, watching the father of her daughter hold their daughter for the first time, and that the decision had been the correct decision, and that she was not going to permit herself, going forward, any further doubt about the specific quality of her own judgment. They married in a small ceremony in the residence library on a Sunday afternoon in April, for months after Anais's birth, in a small gathering that included Beatrice and her family, Persephone's father, who flew in from Portland and who cried during his walk with Persephone down the short aisle they had arranged in the library, and Marcus and his wife, and Dr. Rao, and the housekeeper who had prepared the residence on the specific October evening that had begun everything, and the specific small assembly of the residence's core staff who had, in the 4 months since Persephone had moved in, become, without her having planned it, the specific family who was going to be present for the specific formalization of the relationship they had all understood was the specific real shape of the residence's life. Persephone wore a dress of deep sapphire silk that Beatrice had helped her choose, with Anais in her arms during the vows, and Silas, who had never in his adult life been the specific kind of man who spoke publicly about the specific interior of his own life, spoke the vows he had written for her aloud in the specific full voice of a man who had, over the previous 6 months, learned that the specific interior he had spent his adult life protecting from disclosure was, in fact, the specific interior he most wanted his wife and his daughter to know completely. And Persephone spoke her own vows in return, in the specific plain honest terms she had insisted on in a staff office on a Wednesday in October, and Anais Aurelia Verano slept through the entire ceremony in her mother's arms. And the residence library at 4:30 in the afternoon on a Sunday in April held them all in the specific warm light of a spring day that had decided to be kind to the specific ceremony taking place inside it. Persephone Iyer spent 7 months carrying a specific child in a specific silence she had constructed to protect the specific man who had fathered that child from what she believed was the specific burden of being asked to participate, and she discovered, in a staff office at 6:02 on the second Wednesday of October, that the specific man she had been protecting had spent those same 7 months waiting with the specific patience of a man who considered the participation not a burden but the specific most important thing he had ever been offered, and that the silence she had constructed had been protecting nothing except her own fear of being told a specific answer she was, in the end, given the specific opposite of. If you love this story of a woman who thought she was carrying the specific weight of her life alone and discovered that the specific man across the small round table from her had been waiting all along to carry it with her, hit that like button. Share this story with someone who needs the specific reminder that the honest sentence, said aloud once in the specific right room to the specific right person, has the specific power to reorganize the shape of what comes next, and subscribe to the channel for more slow-burn possessive mafia romances where the women who thought they had to survive alone find, in the specific most unexpected places, the specific men who were built to survive with them.